Cop tries to frame black woman unaware. She's the one who oversees his department. Dark clouds clung to the Philadelphia skyline on the day. Everything changed for Ebony Fox. She was used to storms, injustice, corruption, and all the secrets swirling beneath the surface of her beloved city. But this particular tempest arrived in a shape she never expected, a cunning police officer who would stop at nothing to destroy her name. Little did he know, Ebony was no ordinary citizen. As Director of Civilian Oversight at the Philadelphia Police Department, she held more power than he could ever imagine. What begins as a routine check soon spirals into a clash of fates, setting the stage for a drama of epic proportions. Ebony Fox believed in the promise of justice. Born and raised in the heart of Philadelphia, she grew up in a community that taught her resilience, compassion, and an unyielding commitment to doing what was right, even when the world seemed determined to sway her otherwise. From her earliest days, Ebony had watched how authority sometimes failed those most in need, how laws could be manipulated to serve a select few. It was a lesson burned into her memory when her father, a gentle soul and a longtime city sanitation worker, was wrongfully arrested for a minor offense. Years later, Ebony learned the charges stemmed from a quota-driven policing strategy that had run rampant through her neighborhood. That cruel reality shaped Ebony's ambition. She put herself through college on scholarships, cleaning houses and waiting tables when funds ran low. She attended the University of Pennsylvania, an institution just blocks away from struggling neighborhoods like hers, but worlds apart in terms of opportunity. There she studied law and public policy, determined to prevent the injustices she'd witnessed from happening to others. Ebony interned with the city's Legal Aid Society, volunteered at voter registration drives, and spent countless hours listening to stories from everyday citizens whose voices were often ignored. Shortly after graduation, Ebony landed a position at the Philadelphia mayor's office. Her relentless dedication and insightful reports caught the attention of high-ranking officials. When the city announced they were revamping the oversight structure of the Philadelphia Police Department to ensure greater accountability, Ebony seemed like the perfect fit. With her deep understanding of the system's failings and her fierce belief in reform, she quickly became an invaluable asset. Within a year, she was appointed Director of Civilian Oversight, a newly created role designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. For Ebony, it was more than just a title. It was an opportunity to dismantle unjust practices from within, to promote fairness, and to serve as a beacon for those who felt powerless under the weight of bureaucracy. There were allies, colleagues, who championed her vision for a transparent policing system that would actually protect and serve all citizens. But there were also adversaries, people who viewed Ebony's reforms as a threat to their power. Whispers followed her wherever she went. The new director was too idealistic, too naive, or too by the book to succeed. Ebony shrugged off the rumors. She knew the path to real change would be riddled with obstacles. Even so, nothing could have prepared her for what was brewing just beneath the polished floors of headquarters. Each day, she meticulously reviewed complaints from citizens, cross-checking them with body cam footage, police reports, and testimonies. In closed-door meetings, she pressed for stricter guidelines to prevent biased policing. She advocated for mental health resources for officers and demanded that data on stops and arrests be transparent to the public. Quietly, Ebony kept an eye on the more troubling patterns that emerged, particular districts with higher rates of complaints. Certain precinct captains who seemed less than cooperative with the oversight team. And yet, despite her vigilance, a storm was gathering around her, fueled by the simmering resentment of people who preferred the old ways. That resentment took shape in the form of one-man detective Martin Hayes, A seasoned officer who'd risen through the ranks, Hayes had a reputation for getting results. He was fearless in the face of danger, revered by some for bringing in high-profile suspects. But behind the scenes, rumors swirled that he skirted the boundaries of ethical policing. Excessive force allegations clung to his record. People spoke in hushed tones about questionable methods used to extract confessions. Still, he was beloved by powerful players in the department. Where Ebony saw a man who might need to be held accountable, others saw a hero, and so the battle lines were drawn, quietly, almost invisibly at first. While Ebony continued her day-to-day duties meeting with community leaders, hearing concerns from rank-and-file officers, Detective Hayes planned his next move. His own sense of entitlement and anger would soon coalesce into a plan to undermine the very woman who oversaw his department. Little did he know the target of his scheme was far from helpless. The calm before the storm was about to shatter, and in its wake, Philadelphia would be left to reckon with the wreckage. Detective Martin Hayes was a man of paradoxes. To some, he was a dedicated officer who had given 20 years to a city that needed tough policing. He had grown up in the suburbs, born into a family with a legacy of law enforcement. 3 uncles, a grandfather, and his father had all worn the badge. From childhood, Hayes was groomed for the uniform, pushed to excel at athletics, taught to fire a rifle by the age of 12, and given the moral code that the law should be enforced, but never questioned. To question the law, his father believed, was to question one's loyalty to it. He took that upbringing into his career. Graduating from the police academy at the top of his class, Hayes was initially assigned to a gritty West Philadelphia precinct. The stark inequalities he witnessed there hardened his perspective on crime. In his mind, success meant making arrests, delivering convictions, and preserving the status quo. Hayes gained a name for himself by wrangling large drug busts and single-handedly breaking up gang disputes. Commendations lined his walls, each framed meticulously in his tidy, no-nonsense office. Over time, as promotions arrived, so too did rumors about how he secured those results. Some of his colleagues whispered that Hayes manipulated evidence to ensure convictions, that he bullied witnesses into signing statements, or that he coerced confessions from suspects who were too scared or uneducated to fight back. Investigations had been launched, but each time Hayes managed to come away unscathed, thanks to the powerful network he had cultivated over the years. He knew the right supervisors to flatter, the right union representatives to consult, the right politicians to charm. His swagger at the precinct was undeniable. Lesser-ranked officers either admired him or dreaded him. When Ebony Fox arrived on the scene with her progressive reforms, Hayes saw her as a threat to the department's traditions. He bristled at the idea of body cameras, of mandatory desk duty for officers facing complaints, or of transparency that might tie the hands of law enforcement. In his mind, Ebony's presence weakened their power and, by extension, the city's safety. He convinced himself that her oversight, a role mandated by the mayor and widely celebrated in local newspapers, was little more than misguided interference. At first, he tried to ignore her initiatives. He downplayed policy changes that Ebony enacted, ran his department as he always had, and avoided any direct confrontations. But that changed one afternoon, when Ebony demanded he and his team provide unedited bodycam footage for an investigation into a questionable arrest. A prominent local pastor, a beloved figure in the community, claimed Hayes' subordinates had harassed him during a routine traffic stop, using slurs and brute force to yank him from his car. Ebony, furious at the allegations, subpoenaed the footage for review. Hayes refused, claiming technical difficulties. Ebony insisted. She made phone calls, escalated the matter through official channels, and eventually forced Hayes' compliance. The footage revealed exactly what Ebony suspected: an unlawful stop, an officer using a racially charged insult, and a blatant disregard for the pastor's rights. Swift disciplinary measures followed, not only for the officer in question, but also for Hayes, who had attempted to bury the evidence. Though Hayes faced only a formal reprimand, it was a direct blow to his image and a blemish on his otherwise carefully managed reputation. Overnight, Ebony became his sworn nemesis. In private rants to trusted allies, he railed against her. He accused Ebony of not respecting the challenges of real police work, of coddling criminals, and of harboring an anti-police agenda. The tension between them, once a mere undercurrent, solidified into outright hostility. But Hayes was not one to sit idle. Fueled by wounded pride and a sense of entitlement, he began devising a strategy to ensure Ebony Fox would never again threaten his career. He wanted her gone, disgraced, maybe even behind bars if he could manage it. Step by step, he planned how to turn the system against her, never once dreaming that the woman he aimed to destroy had more institutional power than he could possibly fathom. Ebony's day started early, typically around 5 a.m. She liked to begin with a brisk walk through her neighborhood, a daily reminder of whom she was fighting for. As dawn cracked the sky, she'd lace up her running shoes and make her way down Walnut Street, passing the local convenience stores that were still shuttered in the quiet hours. These blocks were her history. She greeted neighbors who were just waking up, sometimes exchanging quick hugs or words of encouragement. They knew her story, and they had pinned their hopes for a fairer Philadelphia on her. After her walk, she'd head back to her modest row home for a quick shower and a cup of black coffee, which she sipped while checking the latest news on her phone. She paid special attention to any police-related stories, anticipating the calls and crises that might land on her desk that day. Sometimes she'd read about peaceful rallies in support of her office, sometimes about heated confrontations that threatened to undo the trust she'd worked so hard to build. The weight of these issues pressed on her shoulders, but Ebony thrived on the challenge. She believed wholeheartedly that real change was possible if she kept pushing forward. Around 7:30 a.m., Ebony would arrive at her downtown office in City Hall, a lofty, ornate building whose marble floors echoed with the footsteps of officials, interns, and concerned citizens navigating its corridors. Her staff greeted her with warm smiles, all of them inspired by her dedication. She typically scheduled an 8 a.m. briefing to go over new complaints filed overnight, urgent letters from community groups, and any policy updates she was championing. She made it her mission to hear from everyone's secretaries, analysts, legal aides, and the newly formed Committee of Community Representatives who served as her extended ears on the ground. Mid-mornings found her in painstaking review sessions, poring over police documents, analyzing footage, and crafting recommendations. The job demanded an unrelenting examination of the department's dealings. If Ebony noticed anomalies like spikes in excessive force, claims tied to a particular precinct, she'd prepare an immediate inquiry. She wasn't afraid to pick up the phone and call station commanders directly, pushing them for explanations. This direct approach sometimes led to friction, but Ebony found that many rank-and-file officers secretly respected her thoroughness. Quite a few were tired of seeing the department's reputation tarnished by a handful of bad actors. By noon, Ebony would either grab a quick lunch at the sandwich cart outside, or sometimes skip lunch entirely if the day was especially hectic. Staffers often had to coax her to eat, reminding her that her health was vital if she hoped to maintain her relentless schedule. Afternoons typically involved community outreach meetings, where Ebony listened to the grievances and ideas of local leaders, pastors, youth organizers, business owners, people who had a profound understanding of day-to-day life on Philadelphia's streets. It was the kind of work that demanded an emotional investment. Ebony sometimes cried in private after hearing personal stories of police brutality or discrimination, but she never allowed herself to be paralyzed by anger or sadness. Instead, she channeled those emotions into systemic solutions, making sure her oversight office developed clear policy recommendations that wouldn't just sit on a shelf. Implementation was her favorite word, one she repeated in almost every meeting. We can't just talk about change. We have to implement it. Late evenings were spent drafting memos, reviewing data, and prepping her staff for the next day's challenges. More often than not, she'd go home with a briefcase stuffed with documents. It was a grueling routine, but Ebony's passion fueled her. People were counting on her to protect their civil rights. She was determined not to let them down. All the while, she remained only vaguely aware of the deepening hostility in certain corners of the police department. She had her suspicions about officers who disliked her demands for transparency. Still, Ebony rarely had time to dwell on personal vendettas. She saw her role as bigger than any single feud. But the feud, unbeknownst to her, was about to land on her doorstep, and in the most unexpected, dangerous way imaginable. Detective Hayes watched Ebony from a distance, quietly, methodically, like a hunter studying his prey. Though they rarely crossed paths in person, he heard enough in the halls of his precinct to paint a picture of a woman who was determined to tear down what he considered the old guard. Every newly proposed regulation, every disciplinary action triggered by Ebony's office, felt to Hayes like a personal affront, especially after his reprimand in the pastor's case. Bitterness gnawed at him. He began to do his own research on Ebony. He wanted every detail, her background, her family, her daily routines. He was looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities he could exploit. He learned about her father's wrongful arrest, her scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania, her volunteer work. At first, nothing stood out as a glaring scandal. But a detective of Hayes's caliber wouldn't let that deter him. He decided that if no skeletons existed, perhaps he could fabricate one. His first step was a small yet crucial act of infiltration. Through an acquaintance in the records department, someone who owed Hayes a favor, he gained discreet access to Ebony's records. Medical, financial, even her parking tickets. He found almost nothing incriminating, a testament to Ebony's squeaky clean life. But he took notes, stored them in a private folder labeled Project Eclipse. He liked the dramatic ring of it. It made him feel like he was orchestrating a grand operation. Next, he began to foster relationships with certain unscrupulous individuals who might be willing to collaborate on a smear campaign. He reached out to ex-informants, to small-time criminals who had once benefited from his leniency. He even considered leaning on a local journalist, someone known for sensational reporting. Carefully, he tested the waters, planting seeds of doubt about Ebony's integrity. She's too good to be true. What if she's on the take? Or I've heard rumors she's involved in hush money deals. Hayes found, much to his satisfaction, that rumors tended to multiply like weeds once planted. Yet, he craved more solid ground. He needed evidence, manufactured or otherwise, that could stick. A scorned ex-boyfriend would have been ideal, but Ebony's past relationships were short-lived and non-dramatic. The closest Hayes came was learning about a man named Marcus who had once worked alongside Ebony at the Legal Aid Society. The relationship had ended amicably, leaving no bitterness to exploit. Then an unexpected opportunity arose. One of Hayes' confidential informants, a small-time drug dealer named Rico, found himself in a bind. He had been caught in a sting that threatened to land him a lengthy prison sentence. Rico begged Hayes for help, offering to do whatever it took to avoid jail time. In that moment, the puzzle pieces clicked in Hayes' mind. He would use Rico to manufacture an incident, tying Ebony to illegal activities. He might plant drugs in Ebony's car or pay someone to claim they had seen Ebony dealing in illicit substances. The exact details were still fuzzy, but the wheels were in motion. Hayes promised Rico reduced charges if he cooperated. One night, Hayes invited Rico to meet him in a deserted parking lot under the cover of darkness. The detective outlined his plan in hush-hush tones. Ebony would be set up, her reputation shredded. Hayes even hinted that Ebony could be arrested if all went according to plan. Rico seemed wary, framing the director of civilian oversight was no small risk, but Hayes made it clear that cooperating was the only way Rico could avoid a stiff sentence. Fear trumped caution, and Rico reluctantly agreed to do whatever was asked. Thus, the conspiracy took shape, built on half-truths, manipulated evidence, and desperation. Hayes felt a rush of adrenaline. He was finally taking action, no longer a victim of Ebony's so-called reforms. Little did he realize that in orchestrating Ebony's downfall, he was putting into motion forces that would lead to his own. Sometimes, the seeds of conspiracy sow the seeds of destruction. This was a lesson Hayes would learn all too painfully. One crisp autumn morning, Ebony received an urgent call from a community liaison. There had been a spate of complaints from residents in one of Philadelphia's poorest districts. They alleged that certain officers were harassing youths, confiscating their possessions without cause, and in one instance, using excessive force. Ebony wasted no time. She assembled a small task force to investigate, determined to uncover the truth. That same day, Detective Hayes set his plan in motion. He'd instructed Rico to file a false complaint, alleging that Ebony had solicited a bribe in exchange for ignoring certain departmental violations. According to Rico's fabricated statement, Ebony had demanded cash to keep a series of misdemeanors under wraps, particularly drug-related offenses. The complaint was filed through a third party to avoid immediate suspicion, but it still landed in Ebony's oversight office. When Ebony and her staff came across the complaint, they were stunned. Ebony Fox taking bribes. It was laughable on its face. Everyone knew her finances were thoroughly vetted when she'd stepped into her role. Nevertheless, official procedure required that any complaint against the director be escalated to an external investigative body to avoid conflicts of interest. Ebony found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to hand over her personal records, trusting an outside review board to clear her name. It was a humiliating experience that overshadowed her other vital work. While Ebony scrambled to address the false allegations, Hayes quietly whispered to the right ears. He sowed doubts. "Hey, did you hear Ebony Fox is under investigation? You know what they say, where there's smoke, there's fire." The rumor spread like a contagion through the department, and soon Ebony found herself facing suspicious glances even from colleagues she once trusted. A few higher-ups offered polite support, but the doubt lingered. Determined not to lose focus, Ebony continued her mission. She put in even longer hours, personally investigating the new complaints that had flooded her office. She spoke to witnesses, pored over surveillance footage, and questioned officers in the allegedly troubled precinct. But her usual confidence wavered. Even if the bribery allegations were entirely baseless, Ebony couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, that this complaint was only a piece of a broader campaign against her. Her suspicions deepened when she noticed oddities in her day-to-day life. One evening, she left her office late and spotted a shadowy figure watching her from across the street. When she turned to confront him, he vanished into the night. The next morning, she discovered her tires partially deflated, as though someone had tampered with them. She filed a report with security, but received no immediate leads. Her gut told her she was being followed, her routine monitored by unseen eyes. Within the oversight office, Ebony made a quiet decision. She would not let fear rule her. She began documenting every unusual occurrence, keeping meticulous notes, just as she'd been trained in her legal work. She also confided in two of her most trusted staff members, explaining her concerns without making wild accusations. Though they had little concrete evidence, they believed her. They respected her instincts. Then a turning point arrived. Ebony's name and photograph appeared in a local tabloid, accompanied by an inflammatory headline, "Director Under Fire. Corruption Claims Rock City Hall." The article cited anonymous departmental sources who claimed that Ebony was under active investigation for bribery and misconduct. The blow to her reputation was immediate and severe. Community trust in Ebony wavered, and even supportive city officials began urging her to temporarily step aside for the sake of optics. But Ebony refused. Stepping down, even temporarily, would only validate the lies. She'd fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to allow herself to be scapegoated. With renewed determination, she vowed to unmask the people behind these slanderous claims, never suspecting that the very detective sworn to uphold the law was orchestrating the entire smear campaign. In the midst of the swirling accusations, Ebony found solace in her family, a support system that had witnessed her evolution from a determined child to a formidable public servant. Most evenings, she visited her aging father, Samuel Fox, who lived in a modest apartment complex near her old neighborhood. Once a week, she cooked him dinner, drawing on recipes her mother had handed down before passing away a decade earlier. Over steaming plates of soul food, father and daughter shared stories, jokes, and advice, trying to forget, if only for a moment, the mounting tensions in Ebony's life. Samuel understood all too well the weight of false accusations. The memory of his own wrongful arrest decades earlier still haunted him. He often reminded Ebony, "They can accuse you of anything, but the truth always outlasts a lie." He urged her to remain steadfast, confident that her innocence would eventually prevail. Ebony nodded, absorbing his words like a lifeline, yet she couldn't deny the gnawing fear inside her. What if this conspiracy went deeper than she imagined? What if the smear campaign spiraled into something more dangerous? One particularly tough night, Ebony also confided in her older brother, Darius, a middle school teacher who prided himself on turning rowdy kids into dedicated students. Darius was furious about the allegations. He knew his sister was incorruptible, but he also recognized that public perception could be unforgiving. "The court of public opinion can be harsh," he said. "You have to fight back, not just in the system, but in the media, too. If you stay silent, they'll fill in the gaps with lies." That conversation stayed with Ebony. She decided to reach out to a local news station, one with a reputation for balanced reporting, to share her side of the story. She gave a dignified on-camera interview, calmly refuting the bribery claims and affirming her unwavering commitment to transparency. "I have nothing to hide," she told the reporter. "My records, my finances, everything is open for scrutiny. I welcome any investigation because I know the truth will vindicate me." Detective Hayes watched Ebony's interview on TV with a smirk. He recognized her calm confidence, but it only fueled his determination. He spent hours each night refining his plan to intensify the allegations. To bolster the false narrative, he used Rico to recruit two more individuals, people with criminal records, who would corroborate the bribery stories in exchange for leniency on unrelated charges. Hayes promised them freedom if they stuck to the script. Ebony was the mastermind, extorting people all over the city. But Ebony was not idle. With the help of her trusted staff, she began investigating the sudden proliferation of false accusations. They cross-referenced the names of the complainants, noticing a suspicious pattern. Each had prior arrests in cases linked to Detective Martin Hayes or his close associates. A staff member discovered a small but telling inconsistency in one person's statement, suggesting it had been fabricated. Ebony's suspicion of a conspiracy hardened into near certainty. She also contacted Internal Affairs, urging them to examine the possibility of corruption within the department. Though Ebony was usually the one doing the oversight, she recognized that certain matters needed an impartial investigative unit. Internal Affairs took her request seriously. After all, Ebony's position carried weight in City Hall. Yet, Ebony hesitated to publicly accuse Hayes by name, lacking direct proof of his involvement. She feared that prematurely naming him would backfire, undermining her credibility. Instead, she shared her findings quietly with a senior internal affairs officer, requesting an extensive probe into the pattern of questionable complaints. If Hayes was behind them, Ebony prayed the truth would soon emerge. Meanwhile, her life became a juggling act between clearing her own name and continuing the vital work of overseeing the department. Late into the nights, Ebony read old case files, searching for any thread that might link back to Hayes' network of informants. She heard her father's voice echo in her mind, "The truth outlasts a lie." Each day, she hoped it was true, but hope alone wouldn't unravel the elaborate scheme brewing in the city's dark corners. She needed a break, a single piece of indisputable evidence that would unmask the conspirators and restore her reputation. As the shadows lengthened, Ebony wondered what new trials lay ahead, oblivious to how rapidly events were converging toward an explosive climax. Internal Affairs had initiated a quiet investigation, but Ebony feared it wouldn't move fast enough to stop the onslaught of fabricated complaints. Every day, fresh accusations seemed to surface, each more outlandish than the last. Some claimed Ebony was part of an organized crime ring. Others insisted she had used city funds for personal gain. The stories ranged from absurd to borderline plausible, but each chipped away at Ebony's public standing. Amid the chaos, an unexpected ally stepped forward, Sergeant Naomi Brooks. A dedicated officer with a sterling reputation, Sergeant Brooks had recently transferred to a precinct known for high tensions. Rumor had it she'd clashed with Detective Hayes in the past, though the details were scarce. Brooks requested a confidential meeting with Ebony, insisting they speak in a secure location away from prying eyes. They chose a small cafe on the outskirts of town, one rarely frequented by police personnel. Over coffee, Brooks leaned in and whispered, "I don't trust Hayes. I think he's behind these lies about you." She explained that she had overheard suspicious conversations among a few officers close to Hayes, conversations hinting at manufactured evidence, coerced statements, and efforts to take down Ebony Fox. Ebony's pulse quickened. She'd had her suspicions, but hearing it from someone within the department validated her fears. "Do you have proof?" Ebony asked, her voice subdued, trying to mask her urgency. Brooks shook her head. "Not yet. But I'm willing to help you find it." She handed Ebony a small notebook filled with cryptic notes, dates, times, partial quotes she'd overheard. It wasn't conclusive, but it was a lead. From that day forward, Ebony and Sergeant Brooks worked in tandem, carefully gathering evidence. Brooks kept her ears open at the precinct, noting who Hayes met and where. She discreetly checked surveillance logs, looking for anomalies that might point to tampered evidence or suspicious movements. Meanwhile, Ebony pressed Internal Affairs to ramp up their investigation, hinting that she had a trusted source who could deliver key information. Their partnership bore fruit faster than either had hoped. Late one night, Brooks called Ebony with electrifying news. She'd found an audio recording. One of the precinct's security cameras, a device most officers forgot about, had captured Hayes in a heated argument with one of the fabricated complaint witnesses. The audio was muffled, but Hayes could be heard threatening the man if he didn't stick to the plan. It was a smoking gun, albeit an incomplete one. With the right forensics work, the audio could be enhanced, revealing Hayes' voice and possibly implicating him in the conspiracy. Ebony's spirit soared. This was the breakthrough she needed: hard evidence of Hayes' scheme. She and Brooks immediately set up a chain of custody for the audio file, ensuring it would be admissible in any internal or external investigation. But time was of the essence. If Hayes learned about the recording, he'd undoubtedly try to destroy it or manipulate it to his advantage. In the days that followed, Brooks arranged for a specialized audio technician in the department, someone above reproach, to discreetly enhance the file. Meanwhile, Ebony moved carefully, continuing her public duties while maintaining the illusion that she was still on the defensive. This dance between playing victim in the public sphere and methodically building her case behind the scenes demanded every ounce of her composure. Word of Ebony's possible breakthrough traveled quietly through City Hall. A few high-ranking officials started to reconsider their stance on her innocence. The tide was subtly shifting, though Hayes remained oblivious. He was too consumed with his own plans, planting more evidence, coaching his informants that he underestimated Ebony's ability to strike back. Little did he know, the evidence was piling up, and soon it would erupt in a bombshell revelation. In the shadows of Philadelphia's law enforcement community, alliances were forming, secrets were being recorded, and Ebony Fox was emerging as a force to be reckoned with. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would determine the fate of everyone involved. The day dawned with an unusual chill in the air, as though the city itself sensed the tension simmering beneath its surface. Ebony arrived at her office to find Sergeant Brooks waiting in the lobby, her expression a mix of triumph and trepidation. "We got it," Brooks said, handing over a USB drive. The text enhanced the audio. It's crystal clear, every word. Ebony's heart pounded. She hurried into a private conference room where only her most trusted staffers were present. With trembling hands, she inserted the USB drive into a laptop and hit play. The voice was undeniably Detective Hayes. He spelled out the scheme in chilling detail, threatening to frame Ebony unless his informant followed orders. He even mentioned specific sums of money and the false statements that would be used to tarnish Ebony's reputation. Toward the end of the recording, Hayes sneered, "Once we bury her, we can go back to real policing." Outrage and relief warred within Ebony. This was the smoking gun, the proof she needed to clear her name and expose Hayes. But she also felt a wave of sorrow. So many resources, so much time had been wasted on one man's vindictive plot. The brunt of it fell on a black woman who had dared to challenge a corrupt status quo. After listening to the recording twice, Ebony faced her team. "We must act fast. If Hayes catches wind of this, he'll destroy any remaining evidence. Let's contact Internal Affairs immediately, and I'll also notify the mayor's office. This is too big to handle quietly." Her voice trembled, but resolve shone in her eyes. She could feel the tide shifting, a wave of truth ready to wash away the lies. Internal Affairs scheduled an emergency meeting that very afternoon, summoning Hayes, Ebony, and several key officials to City Hall. The atmosphere in the grand hearing room was electric. Hayes strutted in with a smug confidence, wearing an expensive suit and that self-assured grin Ebony had come to despise. He seemed to think he was on the cusp of finalizing his victory, a notion Ebony knew would soon crumble. When called upon, Ebony calmly presented the enhanced audio file. As the recording echoed through the room, Hayes' face drained of color. The thick veneer of arrogance faltered, sweat beaded on his forehead. His lawyer tried to object, questioning the authenticity of the recording, but the forensic analysis was airtight, and the chain of custody unimpeachable. Hayes tried to speak, but his words stumbled, twisted by panic and desperation. "The voice could be doctored," he yelled. But the forensic tech present at the meeting simply pointed to the official analysis. No splicing, no digital manipulation beyond clearing background static. In that moment, all eyes turned to Hayes, some with shock, others with quiet affirmation. A hush fell over the room. The years of rumors about his unethical tactics crystallized into undeniable fact. Among the assembled officials, Ebony spotted a few who had once doubted her. Their expressions were filled with remorse, perhaps even guilt, for having sided against her based on nothing more than rumor. Hayes tried to barge out of the room, but uniformed officers blocked his path. The head of Internal Affairs announced he'd be placed on immediate suspension pending further investigation, with potential criminal charges to follow. A wave of justice swept the chamber. Hayes shouted obscenities, lashing out like a caged animal, but it was over. He was finished. In that moment, Ebony closed her eyes and took a deep breath. A burden she'd carried for weeks lifted from her shoulders. She had fought for truth, and truth had prevailed. Even so, she knew the aftermath would be messy. There would be inquiries, legal battles, and a department left reeling from a scandal that might take years to fully heal. But justice, for the moment, had found its voice, and it was Ebony's voice, unwavering and resolute, that ushered it in. The days following Detective Martin Hayes' downfall seemed unreal to Ebony Fox, as if her life had plunged headlong into a whirlwind that refused to stop spinning. It all began with a single audio file, one that stripped away the layers of Hayes' deceit and thrust Ebony from the role of accused pariah into celebrated truth-teller. In a matter of hours, the city's narrative changed drastically. News outlets which had hinted at her corruption now heralded her bravery. Community members who had offered only cautious support now called her a hero. And in the quiet hallways of the Philadelphia Police Department, hushed conversations about what Ebony uncovered replaced the gossip of her supposed guilt. Even so, a strange hush clung to the air at City Hall. Although many were relieved that the conspiracy against Ebony had come to light, the magnitude of Hayes' corruption and the possibility that he might not have acted alone cast an uneasy pall over officials. Reporters clustered outside the ornate main entrance, jockeying for position with cameras and microphones, determined to get quotes from anyone who stepped through. Ebony's staff, too, found themselves unprepared for the media frenzy. Every question aimed at them boiled down to the same anxious desire. How could one detective wreak such havoc, and what happens next? Ebony knew these questions required careful handling. She had fought too long and too hard to let the scandal devolve into a mere spectacle. For several nights in a row, she pored over documents in her office long after everyone else had gone home. Not only was she coordinating with Internal Affairs to address the fallout, but she was also finalizing reports for the district attorney's office. She wanted each piece of evidence to be airtight, every detail meticulously cross-referenced. Her own reputation and the future of genuine police oversight hinged on the thoroughness of this investigation. The day after the explosive hearing, Mayor Kenneth Rowland held a press conference on the City Hall steps. By his side, Ebony stood with a composed posture that belied the emotional storm inside her. Cameras flashed, capturing every shift of expression. The mayor's voice echoed across the Marble Plaza as he announced, "Effective immediately, Detective Martin Hayes has been placed under suspension pending an extensive criminal investigation. We owe it to the citizens of Philadelphia to ensure that those who enforce our laws are held to the highest ethical standards. And I want to commend Miss Ebony Fox for her unwavering commitment to justice." Publicly, Ebony remained calm, gracious, even as she thanked the mayor. Inside, her thoughts churned. How many more officers might be involved? How many other corners of the system might be infested with this brand of corruption? While she recognized the importance of celebrating a well-earned victory, Ebony also knew that a single takedown wouldn't magically cure what ailed the department. Real reform demanded structural changes, ongoing vigilance, and a cultural shift that might take years to fully implement. After the press conference, Ebony was swarmed by reporters asking if she felt vindicated. "It isn't about my personal vindication," she said, trying to keep her voice level over the clamor of cameras. "It's about ensuring that the people of this city can trust their law enforcement. That trust was damaged by Detective Hayes, but we have a duty to rebuild it, starting now." Later that afternoon, Ebony found a moment of refuge in her office. She closed the door against the din of ringing phones and muffled voices. Staring at the plaque on her desk, an award she'd received for community service years ago, she reflected on how swiftly public perception could change. Only a week ago, she was treated like a criminal by many of the same outlets that now lauded her as the city's moral compass. The dissonance unsettled her. It underscored how fragile reputations were and how precarious the fight for integrity remained. The Internal Affairs Unit wasted no time launching a deeper probe. Within 48 hours, they had confiscated Hayes' computer, phone records, and any files linked to his past investigations. Early reports suggested that he might have coerced or manipulated testimony in multiple other cases, staining what once appeared to be a stellar arrest record. Those revelations led to urgent meetings with the district attorney's office, which quickly prepared charges against Hayes for conspiracy, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and perjury. The laundry list of potential offences seemed endless, each count more damning than the last. The shockwaves extended beyond the police department. Community leaders, some of whom had felt dismissed or even antagonized by law enforcement, now took a renewed interest in Ebony's oversight mission. Pastors, non-profit directors, and activists reached out, offering to collaborate on new community-driven initiatives. Ebony saw the moment as an opportunity to forge stronger bonds between the public and the department she was determined to reform. Though she was heartened by the outpouring of support, a quiet voice in her mind remained cautious. Real trust, she knew, would only come with proof that the system was changing. While Ebony pushed forward, Detective Hayes faced his own reckoning. Freed on bail while awaiting his trial, he discovered how quickly former allies could vanish. His superiors kept their distance, unwilling to publicly defend him when overwhelming evidence painted him as the ringleader of a sinister plot. The police union, ordinarily staunch in protecting its members, offered only the most cursory statements about his right to due process. At home, Hayes's family life began to unravel. Rumors circulated that his wife had packed her bags, and friends who once celebrated his so-called heroism now steered clear. Some inside the department told Ebony that on rare days when Hayes did come near the precinct, usually to tie up administrative loose ends, he wore a haunted, hollow look, as though struggling to comprehend the calamity he had brought on himself. Despite everything, Ebony found little comfort in Hayes' personal downfall. In her eyes, this was not a matter of personal revenge. She wanted the department reformed, not just one man punished. Over lunch in the cafeteria with Sergeant Naomi Brooks, the woman who had risked her career to help expose Hayes, Ebony voiced her concerns. "We can't stop at him," she said, tapping her pen restlessly against the table. "He may be the most blatant example, but I suspect there are others who either supported or overlooked what he was doing." Brooks nodded, her expression grim. "We'll find them," she promised. "Already some officers are stepping forward with stories about intimidation or pressure to falsify reports. They never felt safe to speak up before." That afternoon, Ebony and Brooks co-authored a proposal for a departmental whistleblower program offering formal protections and incentives for officers who reported misconduct. It was a bold step, but Ebony believed it necessary to eradicate the remnants of Hayes's influence. If they could encourage honest officers to come forward without fear, the department might finally uproot the rot that had festered for too long. By the end of the week, the first wave of good news arrived. Multiple ex-informants who had once aided Hayes' questionable drug busts surrendered statements, detailing how he had coerced them into lying on official records. The district attorney moved swiftly, re-examining a slate of old convictions associated with Hayes. Although overturning a conviction could be a lengthy process, the revelations illuminated how deeply he had perverted the justice system for personal gain. Meanwhile, Ebony's name was finally cleared officially and irrevocably. There would be no more rumors, no more suspicious glances in corridors, no more biting remarks in tabloids. That weekend, Ebony took a short break to visit her father, Samuel, at his modest apartment. She brought takeout from his favorite diner, and they sat in his tiny living room, savoring chicken and waffles. Samuel raised a trembling fork in salute. "I told you the truth always wins out," he said gently, pride shining in his weary eyes. Ebony felt tears prick her own. She thought about the lost hours, the sleepless nights, the wave of relief that came when she heard Hayes' voice on that damning recording. Her father was right, but the price of that truth still weighed on her heart. In the weeks that followed, Ebony's work pace tripled, though she managed it with newfound momentum. She attended council meetings where new accountability policies were debated. She spoke at community forums, promising that Hayes' crimes would not be swept under the rug. Everywhere she went, people wanted to hear her speak or shake her hand. While the adulation felt overwhelming, Ebony took it in stride, reminding everyone and herself that her victory was, in essence, a victory for all those who had faced unjust policing but never had the power to fight back. As Detective Hayes' trial date loomed, Ebony stood on the cusp of a changed future, not just for herself, but for the entire Philadelphia Police Department. The evidence was staggering, the political will was strong, and the community was rallying behind her in a way she had once only dreamed about. Each step toward reform reaffirmed what she had believed all along, that accountability, no matter how painful or protracted, was the cornerstone of genuine justice. And even though she could already see new battles on the horizon, resistance from old guard officers, potential legislative roadblocks, and the day-to-day grind of systemic change, Ebony felt ready. She had survived the darkest storm any official could imagine, and she had come out stronger on the other side. Now, nothing could shake her resolve to build a department truly worthy of the people's trust. A month had passed since Hayes' indictment. The city seemed both weary from scandal and cautiously optimistic about the changes underway. Ebony found herself at the epicenter of this new era, her office flooded with requests for interviews, partnership proposals from community groups, and job applications from people inspired by her example. She was grateful, but also mindful of the heightened expectations placed upon her. She decided to take a brief weekend retreat to clear her head, traveling to a small lakeside cabin in the Poconos. Away from the relentless pace of Philadelphia, Ebony spent her days reading, journaling, and contemplating the journey that had brought her here. She recalled the heartbreak of watching her father be wrongfully arrested, the determination that had fueled her academic achievements, and the unwavering sense of purpose that had guided her through the darkest days of Hayes' conspiracy. On the second evening, as twilight sank into the lake's still waters, Ebony opened her journal and began writing down a new vision for the department's oversight. She listed concrete goals: improved training for officers on de-escalation tactics, transparent data on disciplinary actions, mental health support, and a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. The city had entrusted her with a powerful mandate. She intended to use it to effect lasting change. When she returned to City Hall on Monday, Ebony was greeted by her staff with palpable excitement. "We've got some major policy proposals to discuss," one advisor announced, handing her a thick folder. "And the mayor wants to talk about a citywide community review board." The old Ebony might have felt overwhelmed. The new Ebony welcomed the challenge. She smiled, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's get to it." In the aftermath of Hayes' downfall, serendipitous alliances formed. Civil rights groups that once viewed the police department as adversarial now found a willing partner in Ebony's office. Even officers who had been on the fence realized that accountability could improve community relations, making their jobs safer and less contentious. The department began implementing changes that once seemed radical, like mandatory cultural competency training and active bystander interventions, where officers were encouraged to step in if a colleague crossed ethical lines. Through it all, Ebony maintained a close bond with her father. Samuel's health had been declining, but he was lucid enough to witness his daughter's triumph on the evening news. One quiet afternoon, Ebony stood by his bedside, where he offered a trembling hand and said, "I always knew you'd make a difference." Tears blurred Ebony's vision as she squeezed his hand in return. She felt a deep sense of gratitude that he lived to see this moment, that he'd watched her stand up to corruption and win. The city council eventually passed a resolution commending Ebony for her courage. She accepted the plaque with humility, thinking not of personal glory but of the thousands of Philadelphians who deserved better policing. In her acceptance speech, she mentioned the name of her father, Samuel Fox, citing his unjust experience as a turning point in her life. She also mentioned the real name of the department she worked tirelessly to improve, the Philadelphia Police Department. The moment felt surreal, but it was also a testament to how far she'd come. Detective Hayes, meanwhile, awaited trial. Rumor had it he was trying to negotiate a plea deal, offering to expose other corrupt practices in exchange for a lighter sentence. Ebony didn't relish the idea of hearing more about his misdeeds, but she understood it might help root out deeper issues in the department. If his downfall could serve a greater purpose, so be it. Karma had hit him hard, and the city was better for it. As Ebony left the council chambers that evening, she paused on the grand steps overlooking Philadelphia's bustling streets. A gentle breeze rustled her hair, carrying the faint scent of pretzels and cheesesteaks. She breathed in deeply, reflecting on the improbable journey that had led her here. She'd defended her name, unmasked a corrupt detective, and sparked reforms that would resonate for years to come. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the real work continued, but for now, she allowed herself a moment to savor the promise of a new day, a day in which justice could indeed prevail. And so ends our dramatic tale, where a determined woman faced the darkness of corruption and emerged victorious. Ebony Fox's story stands as a beacon of hope, a reminder that power without accountability can be challenged and overturned. If you've been inspired by her resilience and the twists that unfolded in Philadelphia's corridors of power, remember that the fight for justice thrives when ordinary people stand firm against wrongdoing. Now, we want to hear your thoughts. Did you feel the tension when everything seemed stacked against Ebony? Were you cheering when the truth finally came to light? Let's keep the conversation alive. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll help us bring more stories of courage, redemption, and the unstoppable force of truth straight to you. Thank you for watching.